was the case in 2016, and their book is available. I'll speak briefly a little bit about some of the points that I make. So I now turn to the video from my colleagues who are being represented virtually, and I'll come back in a few minutes.
So we're here at the ANU Malaysia Update Conference here in Canberra, and one of the real themes that's been discussed in terms of explaining why GE14 happened was the Najib factor, that the voters were just so desperate to throw Najib out. I mean, James, you travelled a fair bit around Malaysia during GE14. Do you think that UMNO had a Najib problem or UMNO had an UMNO problem? Did UMNO lose GE14 or did Najib lose it?
I think the general consensus increasingly is that everybody hated Najib, but the Najib brand was toxic primarily because of the antics of the wife. So combined with the wife, you just could not sell the brand. And in the Malaysian situation, right, the brand of the leader is closely tied with the brand of the party. So the moment Najib and the wife's brand became toxic, UMNO itself became totally toxic. So I would argue that the reasons why the opposition did well, in addition to the Mahathir factor, was that people just wanted to get rid of Najib.
So, I mean, of course, after GE14, I mean, UMNO had this moment where they could have taken a few paths. They had to choose a new leader. They could have chosen, in somebody like Khairi Jamaluddin, a relatively progressive and certainly quite articulate younger candidate. Instead, they go with Zahid Hamidi, has a reputation of being a bit of a hard man, a real UMNO machine politician. I mean, Clive, what do you think about this choice?
UMNO was in dire straits before the election, and after the election they were not only in shock, but they were fundamentally divided and detached from power and without resources. But within that situation they were internally divided, and when they finally had their long-delayed election, half of the party voted for Najibism without Najib. One of the other half, 2/3 voted for looking forward with Khairi Jamaluddin, and 1/3 of the other half voted for Tengku Razaleigh, which was a way of saying, we'd like to go back to the time when the old formula worked and it was not a problem. They're now stuck with Zahid, who cannot be easily challenged within the party, I don't think, but he presides over a divided party, and one that really has no directions to go other than the wrong direction, which is that of an increasing entente, an increasing complicity with the Islamist party PAS on PAS's terms.
But I think UMNO always stood, it was very clear from its foundation, it always stood for Ketuanan Melayu. But sometime in the 1980s, early 1990s, it sort of veered off Ketuanan Melayu and into the area Ketuanan Islam. That's the basic premise of PAS. I think what you have with UMNO now is essentially, UMNO is an interesting party in terms of the structure has not changed. It is still basically run by what we call the warlords, the Ketua Bahagians, and they're totally detached from reality. In fact, I've spoken to quite a number of them. They actually believe that Pakatan Harapan government under Mahathir will not last. And in many ways, they're actually thinking of a comeback. And the favorite example they like to give is what happened to the LDP. So they are putting on a positive spin. They said that we're out of power. This allows us to reform and we'll come back in a very big way because we have the support of PAS.
So, I mean, is it too soon to sort of start writing obituaries for UMNO? Because, again, the title of the book, The End of UMNO, was that premature or is this a sign of things to come?
In the Malay terms, you say, is it a talqin? Is it a death knell? Is it the graveside prayer? Look, I think it is too early to say. Basically, we heard some results today that suggested, far from there being a Malay tsunami, that basically of Malay votes, 1/4 were for Pakatan Harapan, and the other 75% were divided between UMNO BN and PAS, which was not a turning away from Ketuanan Melayu or Ketuanan Melayu inflected and charged by Islam. It's just a lot of people there decided to affirm their being Malay by transferring their allegiance, perhaps only short-term, tactically, from UMNO to PAS. But in a sense, UMNO, this direction is one where UMNO increasingly is fated to be in cooperation with PAS on PAS's terms. The only direction which I think UMNO can live is not, the way forward is to turn back, not to turn back to the past, to the UMNO of 1946 or 1957. It's to turn back to the centre, which was where UMNO once positioned itself, and the centre which it increasingly abandoned in the Najib years, in the Najib decade.
So finally, James, I mean, how does UMNO stay A, electorally relevant, and B, play a constructive role in Pakatan Malaysia? And indeed, are those two goals in tension or in conflict?
I think the way to look forward in terms of Malaysian politics is really all the cards are against UMNO, but in some ways all the cards are being held by Pakatan Harapan. So if Pakatan Harapan can show that they can rule properly, bring development to Malaysia, especially look after the bottom 40% of the population, then UMNO will be in big trouble. But if Pakatan cannot hold its cards together, and the reason why I said that we have to look towards Pakatan, because there's a general expectation in Malaysia that in 2 years' time there will be a leadership change. And we do not know how the leadership will look like under Anwar Ibrahim. With Mahathir, you know exactly what you're getting. You're getting a 93-year-old person who's the Prime Minister second time around, and he's very clear about what he's going to do. And after all, if you're confused about Mahathir, go back and read the book he wrote in 1971.
All right, just while I've got you, I know I said the last questions, but okay, what are the odds that before GE15 we will see UMNO welcomed into the Pakatan coalition?
Well, if UMNO succumbs to the embrace of PAS, that's not on. If it joins some junior minor party with the other team, I think they count for very little. I think the only chance they've got is the very difficult one of re-establishing their own credibility in the centre. But make no mistake that the UMNO people, even though they've had a huge setback, have not given up. They're biding their time. They're waiting for a government that came to power to its own surprise to falter and stumble and to go into crisis. And when it does, the forces of UMNO-ish restoration will be ready to move. And it will be a very sad day if that happens, I think. This government is inherently questionable in some sense, its foundation and strength, but it cannot allow itself to fail, and its followers, the people who support it, cannot allow it to fail. But are they strong enough to ensure that this Pakatan Harapan government doesn't fail itself? That's the big question.
So James, what do you reckon? Do you think there is any chance that UMNO could be welcomed into government?
Well, anything can happen. After all, nobody predicted that Mahathir, as a 92-year-old person, will come back to active politics and win government. I think that's not the right way of looking at it. I think what is very clear with UMNO now is that two things are happening. One is that for the very first time in its history, it's going to try to run a party without any resources. So previously they had unlimited resources. So now they can't even run some of their normal programs. So linked to that point is that what we can expect to see over the next 24 months is that increasingly the more elected UMNO people who feels that they cannot survive in a party where there's no resources, they will start moving out. So if they move towards the Pakatan Harapan government, essentially they only have two choices, PKR or Bersatu. And my take is that increasingly we will see more MPs and state assemblymen from UMNO moving towards the government as individuals rather than as a party.
Betul.